Welcome to this video walkthrough. Today we'll be reviewing a demo for how to receive a notification when a reference you are tracking has been unsubscribed. So what you currently see on the screen is the Vizion API documentation. This is specifically our recipe section, which provides a simple format for showing step-by-step code demos for common use cases. In this video, we'll be focusing on the receive notification when reference has been unsubscribed recipe. This will show how to use the get reference endpoint to know when a reference has been unsubscribed. This code is written in JavaScript, but you can take these general steps and adapt them to your use case and preferred programming language. So here is the API reference documentation. At a high level, this code is going to pull this get reference endpoint. It's going to check the active property on the reference. So that's right here. We can see that it's a Boolean. If it's false, that means that the reference has been unsubscribed. And then the code is going to provide a log of whether the reference was unsubscribed using auto unsubscribe functionality, or if it was manually deactivated. And we will cover those shortly. So let's take a look at the code. You'll notice that we have these step-by-step instructions on the side here. We'll be reviewing all of these steps from start to finish. So the first thing we're doing is importing the Axios library. So this is just the library being used to make the HTTP requests, but you of course can use whichever library and language you're working with. And then we define the reference IDs. So these are, right now there's just this one ID, but you can add as many as you'd like to this array. And these will be the references that you want to check to see if they've been unsubscribed. We then have an empty object that we're using later to store polling intervals. And this will make sense a little bit further on. So next we have a function that will handle notifications when a reference has been unsubscribed. This function will also stop polling for that particular reference using the clear interval function, since we no longer need to check for a reference if it's been unsubscribed. So the send notification function takes a reference ID and it takes this auto unsubscribed Boolean, and then based on the value of auto unsubscribed, it either logs that it's been auto unsubscribed or manually unsubscribed. Let's take a moment to understand the difference between auto unsubscribe and manually unsubscribing. The Vizion API can automatically unsubscribe a reference at the end of a container's journey, and this happens in these two main scenarios listed here. One, if the API detects a get and empty return, or two, the API detects the start of a new container journey. And that would be when we determine that the latest update contains different milestones that occur later than the last milestone in the previous updates list. The auto unsubscribe behavior is on by default unless it's requested to be turned off. So that covers auto unsubscribe. And then we can look at manually unsubscribing, which would be using the unsubscribe a reference endpoint, passing the reference ID, and manually unsubscribing that reference. So that would be the case where this recipe logs the manually unsubscribed versus auto unsubscribed text. So now we have the poll endpoint function, and this is the function that's making the request to the get reference endpoint, which is here. It's passing in the reference ID. And then once we get a response, the main functionality here is we're checking if the reference is no longer active, send the notification. And when you send the notification, pass the reference ID and pass whether or not it was auto unsubscribed or manually unsubscribed, so that we can specify that in the previous logging that we reviewed. Finally, we can start polling for each reference ID. So this code will loop through the array of reference IDs. It will set the interval to check every 60 minutes. So for any references provided, this code will check the get reference endpoint every 60 minutes to see whether or not the reference has been deactivated. So that is it in terms of this recipe. If you have any feedback or questions, please feel free to reach out to us at support@vizionapi.com.